Hey there. Come a little closer to the fire. Let the candle do its small, honest work in the dark. Tonight, I want to make you a promise that feels almost impolite to say out loud. A promise that asks you to forget the gentle fairy tales you were handed as a child. The truth is darker, not louder, not bloodier in the way people try to sell it, just darker in a quiet way. Because real history does not always tuck you in. Sometimes it watches you fall asleep and says nothing. And this story, if we follow it with slow steps, gives us three little shivers, three details that are both human and unsettling. First, an accusation dropped into a wooden box by an anonymous hand. The kind of accusation that could erase a life in Renaissance Florence, and the way it forces a brilliant mind to learn secrecy. Second, the strange, professional task of painting the faces of executed men on a prison wall so the city can stare at death and call it civic virtue. Third, the way a colossal horse, built from years of obsession, ends not in bronze and glory, but as a clay body used for target practice, splintered by arrows until it becomes dust you can taste in your mouth. If you find a kind of peace in the shadows of stories like this, if the darkness feels like a refuge rather than a threat, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps this quiet corner of the world stay lit, just enough. Now, let your room go dim. If you can, lower your shoulders. Let your jaw loosen as if it has been holding on to a secret. Place your tongue gently behind your teeth. Breathe in slowly through your nose, and let the breath out as if you were fogging a window. Good. We begin far from your bed, and yet, in a way, right beside it. The year is 1519. In a small manor house in the Loire Valley of France, there is a room that smells of old wood and cooled wax. The walls are thick, built to keep out winter, and they do their job too well, so the air feels still, like it is waiting. A fire sits in the hearth, not roaring, just breathing. Each time it shifts, a thin crack of sap pops inside a log, and a faint drift of ash lifts and settles again. Like a thought that cannot quite land, an old man lies in the bed. He is not dressed for a portrait. No bright sleeve, no soft fur collar arranged by a servant. He is wrapped in simple layers, and the weight of cloth presses him down into the mattress. His hands rest on top of the covers. The hands are famous, even if the room does not say that out loud. Hands that once held charcoal and quill. Hands that stained themselves with pigment and oil. Hands that measured the world with calipers and with curiosity. Now they tremble in small, private waves. I always find it strange when we see a great life reduced to a quiet body, as if genius must obey the same rules as everyone else in the end. You know that feeling, don't you? When you look at something enormous, a mountain or the sea, and then you see a single grain of sand and realize it belongs to the same world. That is what this room feels like. The same world, the same ending. Around the bed stand nobles and servants. They do not crowd. They keep a respectful distance, but they also do not leave. Some have come because they love the man. Some because it is useful to have been present at the last breath of a legend. Some because the king has asked them to be here, and kings are not often ignored. Their clothes whisper when they shift their weight. A ring taps lightly against a cup. Someone clears their throat and regrets the sound immediately. Even the candle seems careful, its flame leaning and straightening, as if it is listening. The old man's name is Leonardo da Vinci. His mind has traveled farther than most people's feet. He has lived in Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome. He has watched courts glitter and collapse. He has painted faces that have become icons, and he has built machines that never left the page. He has held the human body open in the cold light of curiosity, and he has tried to catch the soul inside a smile. Now, at the end, his breath is shallow, It sounds like wind that cannot decide whether to enter a room. Each inhale arrives, pauses, then leaves with a faint sigh. The bed creaks softly beneath him, a small complaint from old wood. There is a story, often repeated, that the young king of France, Francis I, arrives and holds Leonardo as he dies, as if the artist is a child again, carried at last. We cannot prove that detail with certainty. The records are quiet. The rock record of paper stays silent in places. But I admit, honestly, I like the image. I like it because it feels like the kind of mercy history rarely gives. A great mind, held gently at the end. And yet, if we want to understand why this death feels like the closing of a door on an entire age, we have to walk backward through time. We have to step away from the Loire Valley, away from this still room, and follow the thin thread of a life until it reaches its first knot. So let the fire stay here, breathing. Let the candle keep watch over the bed. We will return. For now, imagine the room dissolving, slowly, like a drawing washed by rain. The stone walls soften into mist. The smell of wax thins and is replaced by the scent of sun-warmed earth. The crackle of the hearth fades into insect song. Time moves without effort. Decades fold like cloth. We arrive in Tuscany, in the middle of the 15th century. Italy, at this time, is not a single nation. It is a patchwork, a quilt made of city-states, duchies, papal territories, each stitched to the next by trade and rivalry, each tugging at its own thread. Florence glows with money and art. Venice glitters with salt and ships. Milan hums with soldiers and steel. Rome carries the heavy perfume of the church and the weight of ancient stones. In this world, legitimacy is a gate. And on April 15th, 1452, a child is born outside that gate, Leonardo. His father is Ser Piero da Vinci, a notary, a man of contracts and seals, a man who writes other people's promises in ink that outlasts their voices. His mother is named Caterina, and the details of her life are uncertain, like a figure half erased on a page. Some later voices suggest she may have been a slave from the East. Others say she was simply a local girl. What we can say, gently and truthfully, is that she does not remain in the official story. She gives birth, and then she is married off, and as raised. The child is raised in his father's household, among relatives who are polite, practical, and aware of the social arithmetic. He is fed, clothed, taught enough to function, and yet he grows up with a small, constant awareness that his path is not the path of the legitimate sons. He cannot inherit the notary profession. He cannot follow the straight line that men like Ser Piero draw for their boys. And that is where the strange mercy begins. Because if the door is closed, you stop trying to walk through it. You turn your head. You look at the hills instead. Vinci is a small town pressed against the countryside. Olive trees hold their leaves like silver coins. Vines climb patiently, season after season, and the soil smells rich when rain falls. The Arno Valley stretches away toward Florence, and water threads through the landscape, sometimes gentle, sometimes furious. A child can learn more from a stream than from a lecture, if the child is the right kind of child. Leonardo is the right kind of child. He draws constantly. He sketches on scraps, on wood, on whatever surface will accept a mark. He watches birds and does not just admire them. He studies the angle of wing and the invisible force that holds them up. He watches how light falls across a stone and wonders why it changes at the edge, why shadow is not simply black, but full of color. There are family records kept by his grandfather, Antonio, small notes, a purchase, a lesson, a mention of the boy's education. They are ordinary documents, and yet, when you read them, You can almost feel an extraordinary presence pressing against the paper, like a hand against a window. By adolescence, his father understands something. The boy cannot be made into what the family normally makes, but the boy can be placed somewhere else, somewhere that values unusual hands. Florence, in the 1460s, is a furnace of skill. Workshops burn with activity. Artists are not just painters. They are engineers, sculptors, designers of festivals and machines. The Renaissance, as we call it now, is not a clean idea. It is a messy, noisy, brilliant reality made of apprentices grinding pigment, of patrons demanding miracles, of scholars translating ancient texts by candlelight. And so, around the age of 14, Leonardo is taken from the hills of Vinci to the city of Florence and placed into the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, a bottega, a place where art is made like bread, with hands and heat and long practice. And as he steps into that room for the first time, the smell of oil and metal and wet plaster rising around him, his life begins to tighten into the shape that will carry him all the way to that quiet bed in France. Just for a moment, let us stand beside him at the threshold. Listen to the city outside, the distant clatter of hooves on stone, a shout from a vendor, the low hum of voices, like a sea, and inside the workshop, the softer sounds, a stone pestle grinding blue pigment into dust, a brush rinsed in water, a sigh, a quiet laugh. Leonardo is 14. He does not know the names that will one day orbit him. He does not know the accusations, the unfinished walls, the shattered horse, the great supper table frozen in time. He only knows the feel of charcoal in his fingers. He only knows that the world is full of questions, and he has always been unable to stop asking them. In Verrocchio's workshop, the first lessons are not glamorous. They are physical. They enter through the skin. A boy is given a stone mortar, heavy enough to make his wrists ache, and a handful of dry pigment, so fragile it feels like crushed wing. He grinds it slowly, not because anyone tells him to be slow, but because he notices something. If he moves too fast, the dust rises and stings the nose. It clings to the inside of the throat. It changes the taste of the air. He learns the smell of minerals, the deep, almost metallic blue of lapis lazuli, expensive as a rumor, the warm red of cinnabar, beautiful and quietly toxic, the pale greens that look harmless until you remember they once came from stone and copper and time. He learns how glue is cooked, how animal skin becomes a clear, trembling liquid, how it cools into a film that can hold paint for centuries if the humidity is kind and the hands are careful. He learns to smooth gesso, to sand a panel until it feels like bone, and all the while, there are sounds. The workshop has its own weather. In the morning, the doors open and city air rushes in, carrying bread, smell, and street dust. By midday, the room warms with bodies and lamps. In the evening, when the apprentices are tired, the sounds soften. The grinding becomes slower. Somewhere, a bronze tool knocks against stone. Somewhere, a brush is laid down as if it is a sleeping animal. Leonardo watches everything. That is the first true talent. Before the drawing, before the painting, the watching. He watches how Verrocchio corrects a line with the gentleness of someone adjusting a child's collar. He watches how an older apprentice holds a model still by keeping his own breathing steady. He watches how light from a high window slides across a wet surface and changes color without anyone touching it. Sometimes, when everyone thinks he is only cleaning, he looks at the joints of hands, the way tendons tighten under skin when a thumb presses against a finger, the way knuckles rise like small hills. He files these details away, like coins, like secrets. At night, when he returns to where he sleeps, he does not sleep easily. His mind keeps drawing on the inside of his eyelids, angles, shadows, the curve of a bird's wing, the geometry of a window frame. For now, he is only a boy in a room full of tools, and the tools are patient, and the fire in the workshop brazier glows like a small sun that never rises, only smolders. If you listen closely, you can hear the city outside settling into night. A door closes. A distant laugh thins into silence. A cartwheel creaks once, then stops, and the workshop remains, waiting, ready to be filled. And if you are listening from a bed, from a sofa, from some small safe place in your own life, let the image stay gentle. Let the questions stay quiet. Let Florence keep its secrets for now. Breathe in and out. We will keep walking, step by step, through the darkness that history calls the Renaissance, until it becomes still again. The first months in Florence pass in a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. Morning brings the chill of stone streets and the smell of damp wool. The apprentices arrive before the city is fully awake, their footsteps small and quick, their hands tucked into sleeves. Inside the workshop, lamps are lit, oil pools in shallow dishes. The flame wavers, then steadies, and a thin ribbon of smoke climbs, searching for a crack in the air. Leonardo learns to begin with the simplest thing, the surface. A panel is not just wood, it is a promise. If the wood holds moisture, it will warp. If it holds insects, it will crumble. If the gesso is mixed too thin, the paint will sink and die. If it is mixed too thick, it will crack like dry earth. So the boy watches older hands. He watches how they spread the white ground with long strokes, how they scrape away lumps, how they wait patiently for it to dry. Waiting is an underrated skill in art. It is also a skill that Leonardo will struggle with in a strange way, because he can wait for truth for years, but he finds it hard to wait for a patron's deadline. There are days when the workshop smells sweet, like linseed oil warmed in the sun. There are days when it smells sharp, like vinegar and metal. When Verrocchio works in bronze, the air carries a different weight: heat, smoke, the faint, sour tang of sweat, because metal demands bodies. Sometimes the boy is sent on errands. He walks through Florence carrying folded cloth, or a small parcel of pigment wrapped in paper, or a note sealed with wax. He walks past churches where frescoes dry on walls like fresh skin. He walks past merchants weighing spices. He walks past beggars with hands outstretched, their palms gray with dust. The city is full of faces, and Leonardo's eyes collect them without judgment. I have to admit, I always feel a quiet sadness in these Renaissance streets, even though we love to imagine them glowing with genius. Because beauty is everywhere, yes, but so is hunger, so is disease, so is fear. The city is a place where a rumor can be sharper than a knife. Back in the workshop, he begins to touch real work. First, he copies. Copying is not mindless here. It is training the hand to obey the eye. He copies drapery, learning how cloth folds when it is heavy, how it breaks into angles when it is stiff, how it pools when it is soft. He copies hands, because hands betray emotion. A relaxed hand is a small ocean. A tense hand is a knot of rope. Then he draws from life. A model sits, trying not to move. The light comes from one side, and the face becomes a landscape. Nose ridge, cheek plane, lip shadow, chin edge. Leonardo draws slowly, and you can almost feel his mind asking, again and again, why? Why does the shadow soften here? Why does the edge disappear? Why does the eye look wet even when it is dry? He becomes fascinated with light, the way other boys become fascinated with games. He stands near a window and watches dust float through a beam. Each speck turns, bright then dull, bright then dull. And he realizes that what we see is not the thing itself, but the thing plus the light plus the air between. It is such a small idea, and yet it changes everything. In the evenings, when the workshop is quieter, he sketches birds from memory. He sketches whirlpools. He sketches the twist of a vine. Sometimes, he sketches a face he saw only once, and he tries to catch not the exact nose, not the exact mouth, but the feeling of the person, the inward weather. Verrocchio notices, a master sees talent the way a sailor sees wind, not in a single gust, but in patterns. So Leonardo is given more responsibility than most apprentices receive so early. He is allowed to paint small details, a leaf, a curl of hair, the edge of a sleeve, and each time he treats the detail as if it is the whole universe. He cannot help it. He wants the leaf to look as if it has water inside it. He wants the hair to look as if it has weight and softness and the memory of a hand running through it. You know that feeling when you are trying to do something simple, and suddenly your mind refuses to keep it simple, and it expands and expands until you are no longer doing the task, but studying the nature of the task itself. That is Leonardo. Even as a teenager, there is a commission that later becomes a kind of legend. A painting of the baptism of Christ for the monastery of San Salvi. Verrocchio designs the composition. The figures are arranged as tradition expects. Christ in the river, John leaning forward, angels nearby, the sky opening. It is a sacred moment, meant to be clear, meant to teach. Leonardo is asked to paint an angel, just one, a lower corner of the world. And yet, when the work is finished, that angel seems to breathe. The face holds a softness that is hard to explain without sounding dramatic. The hair catches light as if it is made of air. The hands do not look like symbols, but like real hands that have felt warmth. Even the fold of the sleeve has patience in it. There is a story that Verrocchio, seeing this, put down his brushes and never painted again. That may be exaggerated. People love tidy endings. Still, the story survives because it carries a truth. The student was not merely learning, he was surpassing. Leonardo's reputation begins to grow in Florence. He is accepted into the Painters' Guild, the Compagnia di San Luca, around 1472, a formal acknowledgement, a threshold crossed. He is no longer only a boy in someone else's room. He is, on paper, a master. But paper is not the same as life. He is still, in many ways, outside the conventional path. He cannot inherit his father's profession. He is not tied to a stable family trade. He floats between roles, between identities, and the city both admires and mistrusts what floats. He begins to take commissions of his own, or at least to begin them. The Annunciation, painted in the years around 1472 to 1475, shows how far he has come. Perspective is precise. The garden feels real, full of botany, observed rather than invented. Light does not simply land, it settles. The whole scene is calm, almost too calm, like a held breath. And yet, if you look closely, you can sense the restlessness beneath it. Each element is treated like a problem to solve. Each fold of cloth, each angle of stone, each shadow, each plant, as if the painting is not only an image, but an investigation. Leonardo's notebooks begin to fill. Notebooks are his true home. He writes observations about water, about how it curls around obstacles, about how it reflects light in broken patterns. He writes about birds, about the mechanics of flight, about how a wing is not only a shape, but a machine. He writes about faces, about muscles, about how expressions form in layers, not all at once. He draws constantly. There is a particular kind of loneliness in the habit of writing everything down. It is as if you do not trust the world to remember what you have seen. It is as if you are building your own memory, one page at a time, because you cannot bear to lose the details. Leonardo also begins to develop the habits that will make patrons sigh. He delays, he revises, he experiments. A patron wants a finished painting. Leonardo wants the truth of how light touches skin, and how atmosphere softens distance, and how emotion lives under the face. It is not a fair trade, at least not in the short term. Florence, during these years, is both a cradle and a cage. The city is alive with humanist learning. Scholars rediscover Greek and Roman texts. Poets speak of ancient virtues. Patrons want art that proves they are modern and eternal at the same time. Artists compete for attention like stars competing for space in the sky. Leonardo moves through it with a kind of elegant distance. Contemporary accounts describe him as beautiful, tall, graceful, hair that falls like water, eyes that hold a steady gaze. Beauty can be a door, and it can also be a warning. People look longer, people talk more, people assume they know you because they have seen you. Sometimes I imagine him walking through the city, and I feel the weight of those eyes on him, the way you can feel a crowd's attention like heat. It is not always flattering. It can be a trap. There are whispers in Florence. There are always whispers. They gather around anyone who stands out, anyone who refuses to be ordinary. Leonardo's circle includes other young men, apprentices, friends, companions. Some are talented, some are reckless. Some are simply alive in the way youth is alive, curious and careless. And Florence watches. You can almost hear the city listening at keyholes, the tamburi. Those wooden boxes where anonymous accusations can be dropped are never far from anyone's mind. They stand in public places, silent, patient, like small shrines to suspicion. I always find those boxes chilling. Honestly, a society that invites secrecy will eventually drown in it. For now, nothing has happened. For now, Leonardo is still building his name, still drawing, still thinking, still drifting between workshop and commission, between study and duty. But the air is changing. There is a tension in the late 1470s, a tightening. Politics in Florence is never stable for long. Rival families pull at power. The Medici hold the center, but the center is always under pressure. A city that loves art also loves revenge. And Leonardo, with all his brilliance, has not yet learned how to be invisible. So tonight, let us end this part by standing with him in a quiet Florentine room. A table, a sheet of paper, a candle, the sound of the city outside, distant and blurred, like waves behind a wall. He dips a quill into ink. He pauses. He turns the page, and in his mind, a question rises, soft as ash. How does a human life get undone? Not by a sword in a duel, not always. Sometimes by a scrap of paper dropped into a box. He does not know that yet. He only knows the candle flame and the scratch of the quill, and the strange comfort of writing things down, as if ink could protect him. Breathe slowly. Let the fire in your own room keep its steady rhythm, and let Florence, for a little while longer, stay quiet. In 1478, the city's tension breaks. It happens during Mass in the cathedral, where you would expect only incense and stone silence. Men bring blades instead. The Pazzi conspiracy. Lorenzo de' Medici survives. His brother does not. And then Florence answers with punishment that is also performance. Some conspirators are hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria. The city gathers below, looking up, memorizing the shapes. Florence wants the memory to last, not as mercy, but as warning. Leonardo is commissioned to paint portraits of the executed on the walls of the Bargello prison. A painter asked to study death closely and translate it into a civic lesson. The wall is rough. The air tastes of damp stone. He sketches quickly, because faces change, because the body becomes less itself as hours pass. I cannot tell you what he felt, but I always feel a cold draft around this detail. The same eye that creates beauty can also make horror precise. When the work is done, people come to stare. They point. They whisper. The wall becomes a public sermon made of faces. Afterward, Florence feels less like a home and more like a room with too many eyes. Leonardo begins to want protection. a powerful patron, a court that can shield as well as support. So he shapes himself into something new, not only a painter, but an engineer, an inventor, a man useful to rulers who fear war more than they love art. He writes to Ludovico Sforza in Milan, Il Moro, the Dark One. In the letter, he lists what he can do: bridges, siege machines, fortifications, canals. Only at the end does he mention, almost like an afterthought, that he can also paint. It is survival intelligence in ink. Imagine him sealing that letter, wax soft, then cooling, a small red pool turning hard, a goodbye that does not say goodbye. And in 1482, he leaves Florence for Milan, 30 years old, carrying drawings, tools, questions, walking out of the city that made him, and toward a court that will offer him brilliance and danger, and a horse made of dreams that will not survive the arrows of history. The road north is dusty. His boots crunch small stones. The Arno falls away behind him, and with it the familiar hills, the olive groves, the particular light of his childhood. Ahead, the landscape changes slowly. Villages, fields, rivers crossed on wooden bridges that creak under carts. At night, he sleeps in rooms that smell of straw and smoke, listening to other travelers breathe, listening to horses shift in their sleep. He is not running. Not exactly. He is leaving, the way a tide leaves a shoreline, quietly, inevitably, and Milan waits, like a larger shadow. The first thing Leonardo notices about Milan is the sound. Florence is all sharp corners of noise, merchants calling, hammers, laughter that bounces off narrow streets. Milan is broader. The air feels heavier, as if it has learned to keep secrets. Even the hoofbeats sound different on the wider roads, more like a drum than a tapping. He arrives with dust on his cloak and ink still fresh in his mind from that letter he sent ahead, the one where he promised bridges and cannons and clever machines, the one where painting was mentioned at the end, almost shyly. It was a strange kind of disguise, honestly, a painter hiding behind engineering, as if art is the softer blade. The Castello Sforzesco rises like a controlled storm of stone, walls thick enough to swallow echoes, courtyards that smell of damp brick and horse sweat, guards whose eyes are trained not to admire, not to doubt, only to measure. Ludovico Sforza, Il Moro, holds court with a quiet intensity. He is not yet officially Duke when Leonardo first enters his orbit, but everyone behaves as if he already is. Power is like that. It settles into a room before the title arrives. In the halls, silk moves like water. Pages glide with trays. Advisors lean in close to whisper. You can feel the politics in the air the way you feel a coming rain. It is not loud, but it is certain. Leonardo, at 30, is no longer the boy grinding pigment in Verrocchio's workshop. He has the posture of someone who knows he is watched. He moves with that careful elegance that can mean confidence or caution, maybe both. He is given small tasks first, designs for court entertainments, a device that makes a lion walk and open its chest to reveal lilies, a theatrical symbol meant to flatter and impress. It sounds charming when we say it like that, almost playful, but even court play has teeth. These spectacles are not mere fun. They are propaganda in velvet. They tell visiting dignitaries and rivals and restless subjects, our court is inventive. Our ruler is favored by fortune. Our culture is untouchable. Leonardo understands that language. He speaks it with drawings. The court watches him. The artisans watch him too. Those practical men who know that genius can be inconvenient. In workshops near the castle, metal is heated, wood is cut, cloth is stitched. When Leonardo walks among them, he does not merely glance. He stops. He touches surfaces. He asks questions that slow everyone down. The way a hinge carries weight, the way a rope frays when wet, the way water behaves when forced through a narrow channel. You can almost see it happening. The craftsmen look at each other, half amused, half annoyed, because he is not satisfied with what works. He wants to know why it works. Slowly, his value becomes undeniable. Ludovico wants a monument that will make Milan immortal in bronze. An equestrian statue of his father, Francesco Sforza, founder of the dynasty, not a modest figure. A colossal horse, larger than anything cast since ancient times. A claim against history itself. When the commission is offered, Leonardo's mind lights up the way dry wood takes a spark. He begins with the horse. He studies living horses in stables. He watches them shift their weight. He watches how a muscle ripples beneath skin when a hoof lifts. He sketches their legs from every angle, not as decorative shapes, but as engineering, where the bones take the load, where tendons stretch like cords, where the joint locks, where it yields. He dissects dead horses too, when he can. It is grim work, and it fits the dark underside of this story. Renaissance courts loved beauty, but they were built on bodies, animal and human. In a low room, perhaps borrowed from a stable or a butcher's space, he opens flesh with a knife, not for cruelty, but for knowledge. The smell is sharp, iron and decay. He has to breathe through his mouth sometimes, and even then the air tastes wrong. Yet he keeps drawing, because the structure beneath the skin is the tree. I always find it unsettling, the calmness of that act, not because it is wicked, but because it shows how far curiosity can go when it is unafraid. You know that feeling when you cannot look away from something that should make you flinch, and yet you are still almost peaceful. That is the mood of these pages. Years pass in preparation. The model becomes clay first, because clay is forgiving. It can be pushed, scraped, built again. Leonardo constructs the horse at a scale that makes the workshop feel too small. The clay body rises, ribs and neck and massive haunches. Scaffolding surrounds it like a wooden web. Imagine standing under it, 24 feet of horse. Its head above you, nostrils flared, a raised hoof frozen in motion. It is only clay, and yet it has presence. The clay holds dampness. In the morning it feels cool. By afternoon, warmed by the air, it begins to dry at the surface. Tiny cracks threaten. Apprentices keep it moist with cloths, as if tending a sick giant. Visitors come. They step in and go quiet. Even courtiers who chatter about everything become still. Because scale can humble the tongue. They see not only art, but ambition. The bronze is planned. 70 tons. A river of molten metal that must be poured without interruption, without error. Leonardo draws furnace designs. He calculates flow. He writes notes in that mirror script that feels like a private wall between his mind and the world. And then, the politics tighten. War is never far from Milan. France watches the rich Italian states the way a hawk watches a field. Alliances shift. Armies cross mountains. A ruler who spends too much on beauty may lose his city. The bronze reserved for the horse begins to feel like a temptation, a pile of potential cannons. And one day, with a kind of blunt inevitability, the bronze is diverted, melted into weapons. The horse remains clay. It is a perfect symbol, and not in a flattering way. Great plans, vulnerable to immediate fear. Leonardo does not stop working, though. He turns to painting, to projects that can survive without tons of metal. The Virgin of the Rocks is commissioned by a confraternity. It becomes a twilight world, a sacred scene set in a cavern of stone. The figures emerge from shadow, as if the air itself is thick with mystery. Here is where Leonardo's soft edges, his smoky transitions, reach a new maturity. Forms do not end abruptly. They fade, as if reality is always dissolving at the borders. Some details are artistic reconstructions, guided by evidence, of course. And we must be humble about what the room felt like when the paint was fresh, but the effect remains. Even now, The painting seems to breathe, not with loud emotion, but with a hush that makes you lean in. He is also asked to paint portraits of court ladies, faces framed by fine cloth, eyes trained to hold composure. Yet Leonardo looks for the small betrayals, the hint of fatigue at the corner of the mouth, the slight tension in a hand, the human weather inside the display, and always the notebooks. In Milan, he is given space to investigate. The court tolerates, even enjoys, his wandering intellect. He designs canal systems. He sketches machines. He obsesses over water, because water is power. It irrigates. It moves goods. It can be turned into defense. He studies human anatomy too, working with physicians when allowed. Corpses become his teachers. This is another dark thread. In an age without modern hospitals, without sterile rooms, the body is both sacred and suspect. Dissection can draw accusations, yet it also draws truth. In a dim room, perhaps at a hospital, he peels back skin and finds the architecture of muscle. He draws the hand not as a smooth symbol, but as an engine of tendons. He draws the heart with careful lines, trying to understand how motion is made inside stillness. Sometimes the smell of the room would have been overwhelming. Sometimes the candle would have flickered in a draft and thrown moving shadows across the body. Imagine that. The living studying the dead by trembling light. It is eerie in the gentlest way, not horror. Just the quiet realization that knowledge is often earned in places we would rather not stand. The greatest painting of his Milan years comes with a commission that sounds simple. A fresco for a refectory wall at Santa Maria delle Grazie. A Last Supper, meant to watch over monks as they eat. Leonardo cannot treat it simply. He chooses the moment when Christ says one of the disciples will betray him. Not the blessing, not the calm meal, the fracture. He arranges the apostles in groups. He studies hands, because hands reveal panic. He studies faces, because faces carry denial, anger, shock, sorrow. He makes the room's perspective lines converge on Christ, so the eye returns there no matter how it wanders. But the technique, he experiments. Traditional fresco requires speed on wet plaster. Speed is not Leonardo. He wants slow control, subtle transitions, careful revision. So he uses an experimental method, painting on dry surface with layers that can be adjusted. It gives him what he wants in the moment. Softness, depth, that almost breathing quality. It also dooms the work. The wall begins to deteriorate. Moisture creeps behind pigment. The surface flakes. The masterpiece is born with decay inside it. I cannot help feeling a quiet sorrow about that. It is like watching someone build a beautiful house out of snow. You admire it, and you already know the sun is coming. Still, for a time, the Last Supper astonishes everyone who sees it. Visitors come and stand in silence, because the faces feel alive, because the betrayal is not theatrical. It is human. And yet, even at this peak, the ground under Milan is shifting. French claims intensify. Ludovico's political maneuvers become desperate. The court feels more brittle. Conversations become quieter, more careful. Money is spent on defense. Anxiety hangs like smoke. Leonardo continues to work, but he is not blind. He has lived through Florentine suspicion. He knows what happens when a city's mood changes. He knows that genius is not armor. In 1499, the storm arrives. French forces cross the Alps. They advance with a frightening efficiency. Alliances collapse. The Sforza world, so glittering, so confident, begins to empty like a room after a candle is snuffed. On October 6th, Louis XII enters Milan. The court dissolves. Leonardo is 47, too old to be a young hopeful, too complicated to be an easy hire. His reputation is enormous, but it is also tangled with stories of unfinished projects, of delays, of strange investigations. In the chaos, he gathers what he can. This is the part that always stays with me. Not the grand events, but the small, urgent packing, paper rolled tightly, drawings stacked, notebooks wrapped in cloth, a few tools, maybe a small model, the things that contain his mind. And then the horse, the great clay horse, that massive dream still standing in its workshop, becomes a target. French archers use it for practice. Arrows thud into clay. The surface breaks. Chunks fall. Dust rises. The giant is reduced to fragments. Imagine the sound of that. A soft, dull impact. Repeated. The quiet destruction of years. Leonardo cannot stop it. He leaves the city with his companions, including Salai, the beautiful troublemaker called Little Devil, and the mathematician Luca Pacioli. They move south, away from the occupation, toward Venice, toward uncertainty. On the road, the world feels exposed. Cold air on the face, the smell of wet earth, the creak of a cart, the distant bark of a dog at night. He carries his notebooks close, as if they are a heartbeat he cannot lose. And as Milan fades behind him, he becomes once again what he has been so often, a wandering mind searching for shelter. At night, when they stop, the camp is small and careful, a blanket shaken out on hard ground, a pot set near a modest fire. The flame does not roar, it only murmurs, because everyone is trying to stay unnoticed. You hear the soft pop of sap in the wood, then a long pause, then another pop, like the earth clearing its throat. Leonardo sits slightly apart, not in arrogance, but in thought. The notebooks are close enough that his fingertips can touch them without fully reaching. He watches sparks rise and vanish. He watches smoke drift with the wind. There is fear in the distance, but it is not shouted. It is folded into the quiet. The way the horses shift, the way Salai glances toward the road, the way Pacioli speaks low, as if numbers might attract attention. Above them, the sky is indifferent, stars scattered, cold, precise. The same stars that hung over Vinci when Leonardo was a boy. That is the strange comfort of it. The sky does not take sides. Let your breath slow. Let the fire in your room keep its soft rhythm. We will follow him into Venice, where water and politics will offer refuge, briefly, and then push him onward again. Venice receives Leonardo the way the sea receives a tired bird, with room, with movement, and with no promise of safety. When he arrives, it is winter. The light is pale, spread thin over water. The city seems to float, not because it is magical, but because it has learned to live with uncertainty. Stone rises from mud. Wood pilings disappear into dark channels. Boats slide like quiet animals through narrow veins of water. If you listen carefully, you can hear a constant hush beneath everything. Water lapping against steps, oars dipping, a distant bell, softened by mist. It is the kind of soundscape that can calm a restless mind, and yet it can also make you feel exposed, because there is nowhere to hide in a city made of reflections. Leonardo is a refugee now, though his name still carries weight. That is an odd combination, to be famous and fragile at the same time. The Venetian Republic, practical and proud, does not keep artists the way courts do. It hires them the way merchants hire skilled hands. The Senate wants solutions. They look at Leonardo and see a mind that can turn the world into diagrams. They ask him about defense. French power is expanding. Threats press against Venetian territories on the mainland. The Senate wants fortifications, barriers, anything that can slow an army. Leonardo studies the maps the way he studies anatomy. Rivers become arteries. Marshes become protective tissue. Hills become bones that must be used, not merely endured. And his proposal is bold in the calmest possible way. He suggests flooding, not as a dramatic act, but as a controlled transformation of landscape. Dams and canals, carefully placed, could turn a valley into water. making it difficult for an invading force to cross. On paper, it is elegant. The water becomes the wall, but paper is not earth. To make such a plan real would require enormous labor. It would require trust in calculations and soil and weather. It would require a government to risk its own land in order to protect it. The Venetians listen. They admire. They hesitate. Committee rooms are not like workshops. In a workshop, a decision is made by a hand and a tool. In a committee room, a decision is made by many minds trying to protect themselves from blame. Leonardo waits. He is not good at waiting, and yet he has learned to endure it. He has endured patrons. He has endured rumor. He has endured the slow decay of his own unfinished dreams. In Venice, while the Senate debates, he walks. He walks the edges of canals where green water carries small debris. He watches how algae clings to stone. He watches how the light trembles on a wall, and the wall itself seems to move, like breathing. He watches birds skim the surface and wonders, as he always has, about flight. Sometimes he goes to the arsenal, that vast industrial heart where ships are built. The smell there is tar and salt and wet wood. The sound is rhythmic labor, mallets, saws, shouted counts. It is organized in a way that feels almost modern, as if Venice has already invented a future where production is a kind of choreography. Leonardo watches machines that twist rope. He watches standardized parts laid out. He takes notes. His mind is always gathering. And yet, the Senate's answer arrives, quietly, like a door closing without a slam. Too expensive, too risky, too many unknowns. The flooding project is set aside. There is no scandal, no public humiliation, just a gentle refusal that tells Leonardo something he already suspected. Venice respects his mind, but it does not belong to him the way a court can. It will not sponsor open-ended wonder. It wants immediate return. After the decision, there is an evening when he stands alone on a small stone bridge. The bridge is worn smooth by centuries of feet. The moisture in the air beads on the railing, making it cold under his palm. A gondola slides beneath, black as ink, and the oar makes a soft, repeating sigh. Each sigh arrives, fades, arrives again. It is hypnotic, almost comforting. He watches his own reflection in the canal. It breaks and reforms with every ripple. That reflection is not vain. It is simply there, a reminder that even a famous name can be blurred by water and time. Exile does that. It turns a person into a moving outline. He thinks of Milan, of the clay horse shattered, and for a moment the loss feels physical, like a bruise under the ribs. Then the feeling loosens, because grief cannot remain sharp forever. It dulls. It becomes a quiet companion, walking beside you without speaking. In Florence, the nights have a different texture. The stones radiate old warmth during the day, then chill quickly after sunset. Wind funnels through streets and carries the faint smell of river water and smoke from hearths. Somewhere, a friar's voice might still echo in memory, preaching purity, warning of vanity. Even if the preacher is gone, the city remembers the tone. Leonardo listens to that tone and says very little. He has learned that silence can be armor, so he looks south again. Florence calls him back, not with affection, but with opportunity. The city has changed. The Medici are gone. Savonarola has burned and been burned. The mood is austere. The streets feel narrower than he remembers, as if the city has drawn itself inward. When Leonardo enters Florence in 1500, the air is still full of echoes from those bonfires of vanity. Even if the flames are out, you can imagine the smell that once clung to the stones. Scorched wood, melted wax, paint burning, the sweet, unpleasant scent of cosmetics thrown into fire. The memory of moral fervor lingers like smoke in a room long after the candle is blown. The new government wants prestige, but it wants it dressed in civic virtue. That is a delicate request. They want art, but they do not want to look indulgent. Leonardo, with his courtly habits and his complicated reputation, must step carefully. A commission comes from the Servite friars at Santissima Annunziata, an altarpiece of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne. They offer him lodging. They offer him support for his household. It is practical, almost tender, and Leonardo accepts. He begins with a cartoon, a full-scale drawing, and this drawing becomes a kind of public miracle. People come to see it the way they might come to see a rare comet. They stand shoulder to shoulder in a quiet crowd, faces tilted, eyes soft with astonishment. The figures interweave. The expressions are subtle. The tenderness is real, but it is not sweet. It carries a shadow, because every mother knows the future contains loss. Even in a holy scene, Leonardo cannot remove that truth. And again, he does what he often does. He gives Florence not a finished painting, but the promise of one, rendered so beautifully that the promise itself becomes a masterpiece. That is part of his tragedy. He can make beginnings so rich that endings feel almost unnecessary to him. The Florentine government notices the crowd. It notices the prestige. It decides to harness Leonardo for something larger, something public, something that will announce Republican strength. They commission a mural in the Palazzo Vecchio, the Battle of Anghiari. It is a celebration of victory over Milan, which is bitterly ironic, considering Leonardo's long years under the Sforza. Yet perhaps that irony is part of the point, a public declaration that he belongs to Florence again. Leonardo approaches the battle with the seriousness of someone who has seen violence up close, not only in politics, but in bodies. He does not want a clean, heroic image. He wants to paint the moment when humanity slips its leash. He studies horses again. He studies teeth bared. He studies eyes wide with panic. He studies the twist of a spine in struggle. He makes drawings of soldiers locked around a standard, pulling, clawing, faces distorted. The horses rear and bite, almost like men. The battle becomes not glory, but frenzy. Florence watches him work. People come to the hall to glimpse the sketches and the preparations. They whisper about genius. They whisper about delay. And across the room, on the opposite wall, another commission is taking shape. Michelangelo. You can feel the tension before it is spoken. Two visions of art, two temperaments. Michelangelo is younger, sharper, more forceful. He works like someone wrestling the stone until it yields. Leonardo works like someone listening to the world until it reveals itself. Citizens choose sides. They compare. They argue. Leonardo, meanwhile, experiments again with technique. He wants subtle transitions. He wants control. He tries a method with oil on the wall, hoping to avoid the speed of true fresco, and the wall betrays him. The paint does not behave. It runs. It fails to set. Sections deteriorate. Imagine that slow disappointment, not a dramatic collapse, but a gradual recognition that the surface will not hold the vision, a wet shine where there should be depth, a softness that becomes decay. The Battle of Anghiari remains unfinished, a ghost of brilliance. Michelangelo leaves his own project incomplete too, pulled away by other demands. The hall becomes a chamber of abandoned greatness, like a museum of intentions. This is where Leonardo's reputation in Florence begins to sour. People admire him, but they also fear hiring him. They want certainty, and he offers possibility. He retreats into study. He returns to anatomy. He visits hospitals. He seeks permission. He draws what he sees, with a careful honesty that can feel intimate and unsettling. A hand opened, tendons exposed, like the ropes of a ship, a skull sectioned, cavities mapped, the body as architecture. He studies flight as well, sketching wings, calculating angles. He writes notes about air and pressure, about how a bird turns with hardly a movement. Sometimes, in his pages, you can sense his longing. not for fame, but for the quiet satisfaction of understanding. And in this Florentine period, he begins a portrait. Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, a modest commission, at least on paper, a private painting, not a civic monument. But Leonardo turns it into a lifetime companion. He paints her with that smoky softness, the edges dissolving into atmosphere. He paints the hands with patient attention, because hands are honest. He paints the landscape behind her, as if the earth itself is old and dreaming, roads twisting, rivers carving, stone rising in layers, and the expression, the quiet, shifting smile. It is not a trick. It is an observation. The human face changes with thought, with breath, with the faintest movement of muscle. Leonardo tries to capture that living uncertainty. He works slowly. He reworks. He carries the painting with him. It becomes a portable laboratory. Sometimes I imagine him at night, candle low, the rest of the house asleep, and he is still awake, not driven by obligation, but by a gentle obsession. The brush touches the surface. He pauses. He leans back. He squints. He listens to his own breathing. He adjusts a shadow by a fraction. He is chasing not perfection, but the feeling of a real presence. Yet Florence does not wait. By 1506, a new pull comes from Milan, now under French influence. Charles d'Amboise, the French governor, invites Leonardo back. The offer is not only money, it is protection, it is space, it is the promise that his engineering mind will be valued. Leonardo leaves Florence again, older now, carrying the Mona Lisa with him, carrying notebooks heavy with decades. When he returns to Milan, the city feels changed. The Sforza glamour is gone. The castle now houses foreign administrators. The political air is different, colder, more bureaucratic. Still, work begins. He surveys land for canals. He sketches locks and water flow. He collaborates with mathematicians and engineers. He returns to dissection when allowed. He produces drawings of the heart that are astonishing in their clarity, though it will take centuries for the world to understand what he saw. It is a strange late-life rhythm, less spectacle, more study, less courtly theater, more quiet investigation. And beneath it all is that familiar melancholy, the awareness that his greatest ambitions have often been interrupted by history, that the world keeps changing patrons and flags, while he keeps chasing questions. For now, he has shelter again. In those Milanese evenings, when the officials have gone and the workshop quiets, he can hear water in the distance, moving through channels like a long thought. He lights a candle and the flame leans slightly, showing a draft through the window. He turns a page of his notebook slowly, the paper rasping, and for a few breaths, he is simply a man listening to the world, trying to understand it before it slips away. Let the room around you stay dim. Let the fire settle into its slower crackle. And if your thoughts wander, you can let them drift like a boat in Venetian mist, returning gently to the steady sound of breath. The second Milan is quieter than the first. It is the same city, the same shape of streets, the same long winter fog that hangs low and turns buildings into pale silhouettes. Yet the tone has changed. Where the Sforza court once shimmered with self-confidence, the French administration settles in like a thin layer of frost. It is orderly, and it is foreign. The castle still stands, but its meaning is different now. It is no longer a family fortress. It is a station of empire. Leonardo returns in 1506 with the weight of years on his shoulders and a small traveling world in his arms. Rolled drawings, wrapped notebooks, the portrait he cannot stop refining, the tools of a mind that does not know how to be idle. He is 54. At that age, you can feel time more clearly. The morning chill reaches the bones faster. The joints notice a climb upstairs, and yet his curiosity remains young, almost stubbornly so. as if the questions have never learned to age. Charles d'Amboise receives him with cultivated admiration. The governor understands prestige. He understands that a famous mind is a kind of political ornament, one that can impress visitors and soften resentment. He also understands, practically, that Milan needs roads, canals, defenses, and that Leonardo has spent a lifetime thinking about water and stone and leverage. So the work begins again, not with grand ceremonies, but with surveys. Leonardo walks the countryside outside Milan, where the land spreads into fields and low wetlands. He carries measuring instruments. He notes the way water sits after rain. He watches the soil darken. He talks to farmers in a gentle voice, asking where floods have come before, where the ground turns soft, where the banks crumble. He listens as if their local knowledge is another kind of textbook. He draws canals as if he is drawing veins. There is something calming about that, the way he approaches engineering with the patience of an artist. A canal is not only a trench, it is a line through landscape, a controlled invitation for water to move. In his mind, water is not chaotic. It can be persuaded. It can be guided like a horse, if you understand its nature. He designs locks and channels, systems that can improve navigation and irrigation. He imagines moving goods with less strain, feeding fields with more certainty. Milan, under occupation, wants efficiency. It wants revenue. It wants control. Leonardo gives it elegant plans. In the evenings, back in his rooms, he sketches quietly. The candle flame trembles sometimes. The wax smells faintly sweet as it warms. Outside, you can hear a cartwheel creak on stone, a dog bark once, then stop, as if remembering that the night belongs to soldiers now. It is during these years that his anatomical work deepens. He works with physicians at hospitals. Permission is not always easy. Dissection is still a delicate subject, caught between medicine and taboo. But Leonardo has a way of being both charming and earnest, and people often make room for him because they sense he is not driven by cruelty. Still, the rooms where he works are dark history in the purest sense. They are places where death is not a metaphor. A body lies on a table. The skin, pale and cooling, holds the last traces of a life that has already departed. The air carries a sharpness that clings to the throat. Sometimes there is a faint, sweet rot that no amount of incense can truly mask. Leonardo opens the body carefully, like a scholar opening a rare book. He draws what he sees with almost tender precision. Muscles layered like woven cloth, tendons shining, tight as cords. The branching of vessels that reminds him of rivers seen from above. He studies the heart with particular focus. The heart, that quiet engine that almost no one has seen working. He draws its chambers. He traces valves. He tries to understand not only what it looks like, but how it moves, how it turns blood into rhythm. You know that feeling when you suddenly notice your own heartbeat, not as a romantic symbol, but as a steady physical fact. Thump, pause, thump, and for a second you feel both comforted and unsettled, because you realize this sound has been happening without your permission. Leonardo lived in that awareness. He wanted to map it. He writes notes in mirror script, not because he is trying to be mysterious for the sake of it, but because secrecy has become his natural climate. After Florence, after accusations, after political collapses, he trusts paper more than people. And yet, despite the work, despite the renewed sense of purpose, Milan is unstable. The French hold the city, but everyone knows nothing in Italy stays held for long. Alliances shift like wind. The Papal States maneuver. Spain watches. The Holy Roman Empire presses. Swiss mercenaries become a factor, as sharp and cold as their mountains. Leonardo feels this uncertainty in small ways. The way officials speak in shorter sentences, the way guards multiply at gates, the way funds promised for a project arrive late, or not at all. His patron, Charles d'Amboise, is a shield. When that shield weakens, the air grows colder. Charles dies in 1511. Leonardo does not speak loudly about it. He rarely speaks loudly about anything now. But you can imagine the internal shift. A man who has spent his life moving from protector to protector knows what a death like that means. It is not only grief, it is logistics. It is exposure. In 1512, the balance breaks. A coalition of forces drives the French from Milan. There are battles, and then there is the sudden emptying that always follows a change of power. Flags change. Uniforms change. People who were confident yesterday become careful today. Leonardo is 60. At 60, starting over is not romantic. It is exhausting. He packs again. This repeated packing is one of the saddest motifs in his story, I think. Not because travel is always sorrowful, but because it interrupts. It tears the thread of concentration. It forces a mind like his to fold itself into bundles and boxes. He gathers notebooks first. That is always first. The pages contain decades of observation. They are portable treasure. He wraps them in cloth. He ties them. He checks them twice. He gathers drawings, rolled and secured. The paper edges whisper as they slide against each other. He gathers small tools. He chooses what to leave behind, which is a cruel selection. Which models matter most? Which sketches can be sacrificed? Outside, the city is tense. There are rumors. There is fear. There is the possibility of looting, of suspicion, of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He leaves Milan for what he senses may be the last time. The road south is familiar now, and yet every journey feels new when the future is uncertain. The landscape passes slowly. Fields, rivers, villages, a monastery bell far away, softened by distance. At night, he stops in small places, inns with smoky rooms, farmhouses where straw is spread on a floor for travelers. The smell of animals, warm and heavy, the sound of wind finding cracks in shutters. He sits near a fire when he can. The fire is never grand. It is a modest thing. A few logs, a low crackle, orange light that makes faces look tired and gentle at once. He watches the flame, not for comfort alone, but because he has always watched movement. The way fire leans, the way smoke curls. It is physics and poetry together. Sometimes he takes out a notebook, even on the road. He writes by candlelight. The candle sputters occasionally, and he shields it with his hand. The flame warms his fingers. Ink dries slowly in the damp air. He thinks about his unfinished works, because a mind like his keeps a list of what it has not done. The bronze horse that never became bronze. The battle mural that never became stable. The canals that exist only on paper. The flying machines that remain trapped in drawings. And yet he also knows, in a quiet way, that his true work has always been the act of seeing. To see water not as a puddle, but as a system. To see a face not as a mask, but as a map of thought. To see a heart not as a symbol, but as a mechanism. That way of seeing is not easily destroyed by politics. By the time he reaches Rome in 1513, he is carrying not only his possessions, but the accumulated sensation of being slightly out of place everywhere. Too courtly for republics, too slow for committees, too curious for practical men, too famous to be ignored, too unreliable to be fully trusted. Rome rises ahead, ancient and loud and stone, a city that wears its history like armor. For a moment, standing outside its gates, Leonardo pauses. The air smells different here. Dust and incense, crowds, horse manure, wet stone near fountains. The noise is constant, layered, like waves. He exhales slowly. Another city, another patron, another attempt to find a stable room where his mind can keep unfolding. If you are listening in the dark, let your shoulders loosen. Let the sound of this story stay soft. We will step into Rome together, where genius becomes both honored and crowded, and where Leonardo will feel, perhaps for the first time, the quiet pressure of being old in a world that has begun to move on. On the way, there are moments that feel almost outside of time. A river crossing, for instance. The water is not dramatic. It does not roar. It simply moves, patient and persistent, pressing against stones, carrying small leaves as if they are messages. Leonardo stands on a wooden bridge and watches the current. The boards under his feet are damp. They flex slightly with each step. A drop falls from the railing and disappears, and he follows it with his eyes until it is gone. He always did that. Follow a thing until it becomes part of something larger. Salai travels with him at first, that lifelong complication, half beloved, half exasperating, with the charm of someone who can smile his way out of trouble. There are days when Salai talks too much, when his jokes scrape against Leonardo's need for quiet. Then there are days when Salai carries a bundle without complaint, or finds a place to sleep that is safer than it looks, and Leonardo feels, despite himself, grateful. Another companion enters more fully now, Francesco Melzi, younger, steadier, the kind of person whose loyalty is calm rather than dramatic. If Salai is a spark, Melzi is a lantern. Leonardo trusts him in a way that is almost rare. Melzi can read the moods. He can tell when Leonardo is slipping into thought and should not be interrupted. He can also tell when the old man needs to eat, because genius does not protect the body from hunger. They move through landscapes where autumn has started to thin the trees. There are mornings when fog lies in fields like a soft blanket, and their horse's breath makes small white clouds. Leonardo watches the clouds form and vanish. He watches the dew on spiderwebs. He watches the way a crow balances on a fence post, its claws gripping the wood, its head turning in small, sharp angles, as if it is measuring the world. It is easy to forget, listening to lists of achievements, that most of Leonardo's life was not spent in glamorous rooms. It was spent in these in-between spaces, roads, rivers, workshops, quiet corners, the smell of wet leather, the roughness of a wool cloak against the neck. At night, when they stop, he sometimes feels the old anxiety, not loud, but persistent. Will the papers stay dry? Will a fire stray? Will someone recognize him and ask for a miracle? Or worse, accuse him of something? He sleeps lightly. In the half-sleep, images come. A horse rearing, frozen in clay. A wall in Florence with paint sliding down like tears. A face with a half-smile that he still has not solved. A mechanical wing that opens and closes, without ever lifting into air. In those moments, I always find it strange how the mind can be its own museum. It displays your unfinished things at the exact moment you are most tired. Then morning arrives, and there is bread, hard and plain, dipped in water or wine. There is the simple kindness of someone handing a cup. There is the sound of a broom on stone as a woman sweeps an inn's doorway. Ordinary life continues. It always does. And slowly, the road turns toward Rome, toward that dense knot of power, where the church and the world are tied together so tightly that you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. As they approach the city, the land begins to rise and fall in gentler waves. You can smell smoke long before you see the walls. You can hear the distant murmur of many lives layered together. Leonardo adjusts his cloak, feeling the fabric settle on his shoulders, and for a moment he looks up at the sky, pale and wide, as if asking it a question he will never quite finish. Rome welcomes Leonardo, the way Rome welcomes many things, with ceremony on the surface and competition beneath. He arrives in 1513, and the city is in the hands of a new kind of pope, Leo X, a Medici with a taste for beauty and a talent for enjoyment. The Vatican is not only a religious center now, it is a stage. It is marble corridors and bright tapestries, the smell of polished wood, the faint perfume of wealthy visitors. It is also paperwork and politics, quiet arguments behind doors, the slow turning of power like a wheel. Leonardo is given rooms in the Belvedere, the papal palace on a hill, and the space feels almost unreal after the uncertainty of roads. There are windows with northern light that stays steady. There is enough room for a workshop. There is access to the papal library, shelves heavy with manuscripts that rustle like dry leaves when opened. At first, this looks like a sanctuary, and in some ways it is. He sets up his notebooks. He lays out his instruments. He arranges his pigments. The simple act of putting objects in place is soothing. A ruler aligned, a knife cleaned, a page smoothed flat. You know that feeling when you finally unpack after a long trip, when the body can start believing it is safe to rest. Leonardo feels a version of that. His shoulders drop, his breath slows, and then, of course, the world begins to press in again. Rome in 1513 is crowded with talent. Michelangelo is here, younger, fierce, driven by an intensity that seems to burn through stone. Raphael is here, luminous and productive, painting with a confidence that makes patrons relax. Architects, poets, scholars, courtiers, all moving through the same spaces, all seeking favor. Leonardo is treated as a legend, but he is also treated as an old man. That is not said directly. It is felt. It is in the way people praise his past works before asking what he is doing now. It is in the way commissions offered to him are smaller, safer, designed to avoid embarrassment. It is in the way younger artists glance at him with a mixture of reverence and impatience, as if they are honoring a statue that still breathes. Pope Leo is polite, even generous. He enjoys conversations with Leonardo, enjoys having him nearby as a symbol of Renaissance greatness. Yet the papal court runs on schedules and public displays. It wants results that can be shown. Leonardo wants understanding, so his days in Rome become a quiet tug-of-war. In the morning, he may attend to a request from the court, a mechanical device for an entertainment, a consultation on an engineering problem, a design for a canal or a drainage system. He listens, nods, sketches. He can still do these things with ease. Then he retreats to his own questions. Optics draws him in again. He studies how light enters the eye, how images form, how perception is shaped by both physics and the mind. He darkens a room, leaving only a small hole for light, and watches the world invert on a surface, a gentle magic that is also a lesson. He writes notes, the pen scratching softly, like an insect moving across paper. He studies water too, because water is always a teacher. In the Roman fountains, he watches turbulence in miniature. A stream hits stone and breaks into small, chaotic patterns. Droplets flash. The sound is constant, soothing, almost like whispering. He sketches spirals, eddies, branching flows. In the afternoons, when the heat rises, the city smells of warm dust and sweating bodies. The air feels thick. Leonardo's movements slow. He is careful with his energy now. He sits. He observes. He rests his hand on a table and feels the grain of the wood under his fingertips, as if grounding himself. His right hand begins to betray him. It is not sudden at first. It is a tremor, a stiffness, a moment when the fingers do not obey as quickly as they used to. He hides it when he can. Pride is not his loudest trait, but he is still human. He adapts. He draws more with the left hand. He relies on assistance. He dictates. He thinks more than he paints. The mind remains an ocean even when the body becomes a smaller cup. Anatomy calls him back in Rome, perhaps more urgently than ever. There are opportunities here, in papal hospitals, in the strange intimacy between church authority and medical practice. Leonardo seeks permission for dissections. Sometimes he is granted it, sometimes not. There are whispers in the court, because studying corpses too closely can make people nervous. They fear what such study might imply. They fear a world that looks too mechanical. But Leonardo is not trying to erase the soul. He is trying to understand the body that carries it. He draws the brain, mapping its cavities, imagining where memory might live, where emotion might spark. He draws nerves like delicate threads. He draws the heart again, with obsessive care, as if he might finally capture its secret. The work is quiet, but it is dark. The bodies are real. The death is not theatrical. It is a cold weight, a stillness, a reminder that even the brightest minds are temporary. Sometimes, after a dissection, he walks back through the Belvedere Gardens. The garden paths are neat, lined with trimmed plants. The air carries the scent of rosemary when you brush past it. Bees move lazily among flowers. From the hill, he can see roofs and domes, the city layered like geology. He walks slowly, one foot after the other, feeling the gravel shift, listening to the soft crunch. Each step is a metronome. He thinks about Michelangelo and Raphael, not with hatred, but with a complicated weariness. They work fast, they complete, they satisfy patrons. Their success is visible, painted on walls that will remain. Leonardo's success is often on paper, in notebooks no one else can read. I always find it strange when a society praises genius but rewards completion. It is like admiring the ocean but paying only for the bottles of water you can carry home. The tension becomes sharper as the political climate shifts. In 1516, the church is beginning to focus on threats that feel larger than art. The early tremors of the Reformation are in the air. The Vatican becomes more defensive, more concerned with doctrine and authority. Curiosity, especially curiosity that touches the body, becomes more risky. Leonardo senses the change, as he has always sensed changes in atmosphere, in politics, in the tilt of a patron's attention. And then an invitation arrives that feels like a door opening in a dark hallway. Francis I of France, young, ambitious, eager to build cultural prestige, offers Leonardo a place near the royal court, a residence, a pension, freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes with a list of obligations, but the gentler kind, the kind that says, be here and be yourself. For Leonardo, this is almost shocking. So much of his life has been negotiation. Promise this, build that, paint this, design that, and always with the shadow of expectation. This offer feels different. It feels like a final refuge. He considers it with the seriousness of someone who knows time is limited. Rome has beauty, yes. Rome has libraries, yes. But Rome also has pressure. Rome has younger men rising like new stars. Rome has whispering suspicion. Rome has a sense of being watched. France, by contrast, feels like distance, like air, like a quiet room. He decides to go. The departure is not dramatic. There is no grand farewell. There is simply the slow packing again, the familiar rolling of papers, the wrapping of paintings, the tying of knots. He chooses what to bring across mountains. His notebooks, always. His drawings, his instruments, a few treasured paintings, including the portrait with the half-smile that has traveled so long it feels like a companion. He leaves Rome in the autumn of 1516. The road north is cooler now. The light is softer. The leaves begin to fall in places, turning the ground into a thin carpet that crackles underfoot. The air smells of damp earth. There are mornings when breath becomes visible again. Travel at 64 is not easy. The body aches. The saddle feels harder. The nights are colder. Yet Leonardo seems, in a quiet way, relieved. As they move toward the Alps, the mountains appear like a wall, pale and immense, their peaks catching light that looks almost unreal. Snow sits in crevices. Wind runs along ridges. Crossing the Alps is slow. The paths are narrow. Stones shift. The sound of hooves on rock echoes. Sometimes there is ice, and the horses hesitate, and everyone holds breath for a moment, feeling the thin edge between movement and disaster. Leonardo watches the mountains with a familiar kind of awe. He has always loved the structure of the world, the way layers of rock tell stories, the way water carves, the way time writes itself into stone. At night in the mountains, the silence is deep. If you are listening now, let your own room be like that. Quiet, safe. The kind of quiet that does not demand anything. In that mountain silence, Leonardo is traveling toward his final chapter, toward a small manor house in the Loire Valley, toward gardens where he will walk slowly and think, toward the companionship of a king who wants to learn rather than command. The world behind him remains full of unfinished walls and shifting politics. Ahead, there is a gentler kind of dusk. When he reaches France, the air changes in a way that is hard to describe if you have never crossed a border on foot. Languages soften and shift. Even the bread tastes different, as if the grain carries another weather inside it. Francis receives him warmly. The king is still young, full of appetite for glory, but there is a gentleness in his curiosity. He does not look at Leonardo as a tool. He looks at him as a window. Leonardo is given a residence at Clos-Lucé, near Amboise, close enough to the royal court to be visited easily, far enough to feel private. It is not a palace. It is a manor house, comfortable, quiet, surrounded by gardens that breathe with the slow patience of plants. The first days there are full of small, practical rituals, choosing a room for papers, finding a corner with good light, setting a table for drawing, listening to the way the house sounds at night, learning its creaks and sighs so they will not startle him later. I always notice that when people move into a new place, they listen first. They learn where the wind comes through. They learn which floorboard complains. They learn the difference between a branch tapping a window and a stranger at the door. Leonardo, who has lived through too many political collapses, learns these details quickly. The Loire Valley feels softer than Italy. Mist rises from the river and drifts across fields. In the garden, leaves hold dew for a long time, and when the sun finally warms them, droplets fall with a gentle sound. Leonardo begins to walk daily. He moves slowly now, but he still moves with the habit of observation. He watches how vines climb. He watches how shadows shift across a stone wall. Sometimes Francis visits with a smaller group. Sometimes, in private, it is just the king and the old man and a quiet fire. They talk. The king asks about anatomy, about cities, about water, about machines. Leonardo answers as best he can, sometimes with certainty, sometimes with that honest humility of a mind that knows how much it does not know. He says things like, "as we understand it," or perhaps, or one possible explanation. He shows Francis sketches. He shows him models. A gear turning another gear. A small device that lifts a weight. A channel that moves water. The king's eyes widen, and for a moment, Leonardo feels something he has not often felt with patrons. Not fear, not pressure, but companionship. Of course, the body continues its slow insistence. His right arm weakens. There are days when fatigue arrives like a sudden shadow, surprising him in the middle of an ordinary task. There are moments when he looks at his own hand and feels the distance between intention and movement. He adapts again. He draws with the left hand more. He speaks more. He teaches. In a strange way, it is peaceful. He makes self-portraits sometimes, not as vanity, but as study. He looks at his face in a mirror and watches what time has done. The lines at the eyes, the way the beard falls, the tiredness that sits at the corners of the mouth, and in the quiet evenings, he returns to his notebooks. He writes about water, about light, about the motion of the heavens, about the body, about the way patterns repeat across scales, branches like veins, rivers like arteries. It is the same obsession, but softened now by acceptance. The feeling that you do not have to finish everything to have lived inside the questions. If you are listening in bed, let that be comforting. You do not have to solve the world tonight. You can simply rest inside it. In France, Leonardo finally has what he has chased for so long, a room where he is allowed to be unfinished. In France, the pace of life changes in a way that is almost physical. It is not that the world becomes kinder. Wars still exist beyond the valley. Courtiers still whisper. Politics still turns like a wheel that never stops. But here, at clossal, the wheel is farther away. Its grinding is muffled by gardens, by mist, by the steady sound of a river moving through reeds. Leonardo begins to live in a rhythm that feels like breathing. Morning arrives softly. The light comes through the window with a pale steadiness. Not sharp, not demanding. He wakes with that slight hesitation of age. The moment where the mind is awake, but the body takes an extra second to remember how to follow. Fingers curl, then uncurl. Knees complain in small, private ways. He sits at the edge of the bed and listens. The house has its own voice. A wooden beam settles with a faint tick. Somewhere in the walls, a tiny movement of mice, more a suggestion than a sound. Outside, a bird calls once, and then is quiet again, as if it has remembered that the morning should be gentle. He dresses slowly, cloth against skin, the weight of a cloak on shoulders, the small ritual of tying something, of fastening a buckle. It is not glamorous, but it is grounding, and for a man who has spent decades being uprooted by other people's ambitions, the ordinary is a kind of treasure. Then he walks. If you have ever watched an old man walk, not with weakness exactly, but with deliberation, you know what I mean. Each step is chosen. Each shift of weight is careful. The gravel path in the garden crunches under his shoes, and the sound is soft, repetitive, almost like a metronome. He pauses to touch leaves. A vine climbs along a wall, and the leaves feel cool, slightly waxy, holding the last drops of dew. He rubs one between thumb and finger and smells the faint green scent that rises. Rosemary nearby releases its sharp perfume when brushed. The air is damp, and it carries the smell of earth that has been watered by night. Sometimes Francis comes early, before court duties pull him away. The king arrives with a smaller entourage now, more private, more sincere. There is less performance in his visits. He sits near Leonardo at a table, leaning forward with the posture of someone who actually wants to understand. His fingers tap once against wood, then stop. He listens, and Leonardo, who has often guarded himself, relaxes into conversation. He speaks about water, about how it wants to move, how it always seeks the lowest path, and yet how it can be coaxed into channels, lifted by devices, slowed by locks. He sketches a curve, a spiral, the shape of a vortex. He explains with that gentle confidence that comes from years of watching rivers and fountains. He speaks about cities, too. Ideal cities. Streets that allow air to flow. Canals that carry waste away. Bridges that connect without choking a place. He imagines a world that is clean, ordered, healthier, and in his voice you can hear both hope and weariness. Because he has imagined these things for so long and seen how rarely people build what would truly help them. Francis asks about flight. Leonardo smiles, just slightly. Not the smile of the famous portrait, but a quieter one, a man amused by the stubbornness of his own dream. He speaks of birds, of the way their wings are not simply flapping, but shaping air. He describes feathers overlapping like scales, creating surfaces that can hold against wind. He draws lines, angles, curves. The king watches, eyes bright, and for a moment, Leonardo is not old, not fragile, but simply curious, alive inside an idea. And then his right hand reminds him there is a heaviness, a stiffness, a moment where the fingers do not quite close the way they should. He shifts the charcoal to his left hand without comment. He continues. He does not want pity. He wants continuity. After Francis leaves, the house returns to its quieter state. Leonardo moves into his workshop, a room that smells faintly of oil and old paper. Notebooks are stacked carefully, tied with cords. Rolled drawings rest in tubes. There are small models, wooden pieces that fit together, gears that can turn if you touch them. He sits, and sometimes he simply looks. You know that feeling, when you are too tired to do anything, but your mind is still awake, drifting through memories. Leonardo's mind drifts through decades. Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome, the sound of a workshop buzzing, the silence of a hospital room, the fear of sudden political change, the rare comfort of a patron who understands. Even briefly, he begins to organize. This is another quiet ritual. He sorts papers. He chooses which notebooks belong together. He labels. He ties. He arranges. It is not only for himself, it is for Melzi, who has become more than an assistant. Melzi is a caretaker of the legacy, a steady presence who can hold the weight of these pages when Leonardo no longer can. Sometimes Melzi reads aloud from a letter or from a text, and Leonardo listens, eyes half closed, not sleeping, just absorbing. His breathing slows. The fire crackles in the hearth, a low sound, steady and warm. There are days when the melancholy comes. It does not crash like a storm. It settles like fog. Leonardo looks at his hands and thinks of what they once did. He thinks of the bronze horse that never became bronze, and he can almost feel the clay under his fingers again, the coolness, the slight dampness, the sense of building something enormous that the world refused to finish. He thinks of the mural in Florence, of paint slipping, of time eating at a wall. He thinks of the portrait he carried across borders, still not satisfied, still seeing small changes he could make, as if perfection might be reached, one careful layer at a time. And he thinks of the strange truth that even his unfinished works changed the world. That is a difficult thing to hold. The idea that you can fail in a practical sense and still succeed in a deeper sense. It is like building a bridge that collapses, but teaching everyone how bridges should be designed. It hurts, and it matters. When the sadness thickens, he goes back to the garden. He watches the Loire Valley sky. It is often pale. Clouds move slowly, stretched thin. A crow crosses from one tree to another, and its wings beat with calm strength. Leonardo follows it with his eyes until it disappears. The seasons turn. Autumn deepens. Leaves fall. The garden looks tired, but not ugly. It is a gentle tiredness, like someone exhaling after a long day. The ground becomes soft with decay. Mushrooms appear in damp corners. The air smells of wet wood and smoke. Winter comes, and the cold settles in the bones. The fire in the hearth becomes not only comfort but necessity. Leonardo sits closer to it. He holds his hands out to the warmth, feeling the heat on skin, feeling the slow return of blood into fingers. The sound of the fire is important. It fills silence without interrupting it. It gives the room a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Leonardo continues to think. He thinks about light, about how it bends through glass, about how it makes edges softer. He thinks about the way shadows can hide truth, but also reveal it. He thinks about the way the human face changes with emotion, the tiny muscles around the mouth and eyes. Sometimes he speaks his thoughts aloud, softly, and Melzi writes, "This is how the legacy becomes a shared act, a voice, a hand, a page." Francis continues to visit. The king's admiration becomes something gentler now, almost protective. He sees the old man's fragility. He sees the slow decline. And yet he still asks questions, because he knows time is short, and he wants to drink from this mind while he can. There is a tenderness in their conversations, not sentimental, not exaggerated. Just two human beings, one young and powerful, one old and fading, meeting in a space where curiosity is allowed to be honest. Leonardo begins to speak more about death, not as fear, more as a fact he has been studying all his life. Now turning toward him, he has dissected bodies. He has drawn the mechanisms of life. He knows, intellectually, that the body is a machine that eventually stops. Yet, the knowledge does not make it easier. It only makes it clearer. On some nights, he cannot sleep. He lies in bed and listens to the house. The candle has been blown out. Darkness sits thick in the room. He hears the wind pressing against shutters. He hears a distant owl. He hears his own breath, the faint whistle sometimes, the slight strain. You know that feeling when the mind starts walking through old rooms, regrets, unfinished tasks, faces you have not seen in years. Leonardo's mind walks through those rooms, slowly, not rushing, because rushing does not help. When morning comes, he is tired, but he still walks. He still touches leaves. He still watches light. This persistence is its own kind of bravery, and as months pass, he makes decisions quietly. He writes a will. He chooses what to leave to whom. He entrusts his notebooks and many of his drawings to Melzi, because he knows Melzi will respect them, not sell them casually, not let them scatter without thought. He gives small gifts to servants. He offers kindness in practical forms. He asks for a priest sometimes, not because he is suddenly a different man, but because he has lived in a world where faith is part of the air and he wants peace. In the evenings, the fire glows, and the room feels like a small island of warmth. In a cold world, Leonardo sits, wrapped in a cloak, and speaks less now. He watches more. He listens. The candle flame shakes slightly, and the light flickers on the pages of a notebook open on the table. The ink looks almost black. The paper looks almost golden in the firelight. And if you lean into this scene with me, if you let your own breathing slow, you can feel the quiet gravity of it. A man who spent his life chasing the mechanics of the universe is now sitting in a room where the most important mechanism is simply the steady burning of a small fire. Outside, the valley is silent. Inside, the mind is still full of questions. And somewhere between those two silences, Leonardo rests. There is one memory that returns to him more often than he admits. Florence, the walls of the Bargello, the faces of men hanged as warnings. The city smelled of fear that week. Even in daylight, the air felt bruised. Leonardo remembered standing close to the wall, feeling the grit of plaster under his fingertips, trying to capture the hollow under a dead eye, the slackness at the corner of a mouth. Truthfully, I always find it unsettling how easily a city can turn a human being into a symbol. One week, a man is someone with friends and habits. The next week, he is a lesson painted in public. In Milan, the lesson arrived dressed in velvet, the clay horse, magnificent and unfinished, waiting for bronze that never came. And later, French archers using it as a target, laughing as fragments fell. From far away, it sounds like a metaphor. Up close, it was dust in the lungs, grit on the tongue, the quiet grief of a thing that will never be made whole. Here in France, the grief is softer, but it still visits. Sometimes he wakes from a half-sleep with his heart beating faster, as if a door has slammed in a dream. He sits up, breathes slowly, and listens until the house reassures him with its small sounds. Then he turns pages, a vortex of water, the anatomy of a hand, notes written quickly, mirror scripted, as if he feared his thoughts might outrun his ink. And in those pages, he sometimes feels a quiet pride, not the kind that needs applause, just warmth, steady and private. In the evenings, when the fire is low and the room smells of ash and warm wood, he speaks to Melzi about the difference between fame and meaning. Fame is a wind, he says, a thing that changes direction. Meaning is what remains when no one is watching. Outside, The night settles again, and the valley holds its silence like a blanket. Inside, the candle trembles, and the old man breathes. Slowly, gently, still curious. And sometimes, after everyone has gone to bed, he sits alone at the table and lets the silence do its work. The room is not perfectly quiet. A coal collapses in the hearth with a soft sigh. The wax of the candle pools, thick and glossy, then cools at the edge. A distant cart on a road, far away, makes a faint rumble that fades quickly, like a thought you almost remember. He rests his palm on the wood and feels the grain. He imagines the tree it once was, the slow rings of years inside it. He imagines time as layers, as gentle pressure. He closes his eyes and lets his breathing match the fire. One slow rise, one slow fall, and he allows the world to be unfinished. That, too, is a kind of peace. The last chapter does not arrive with drums. It arrives the way winter becomes spring, slowly, almost politely, as if time does not want to startle anyone. Leonardo grows thinner, not dramatically, not like a story that wants to shock you, more like a candle that has been burning for years and is now approaching the end of its wax. The flame is still there. It is still warm. It still makes light, but you can see that it will not last forever. His right hand weakens further. There are mornings when he tries to lift a brush and feels nothing cooperate. The fingers hesitate. The wrist refuses. He stares at the hand for a long moment, almost curious, like a physician observing a symptom. Then he exhales, and he does not force it. He picks up charcoal with his left hand, or he asks Melzi to bring paper closer, or he simply decides that today will be for looking, not for making. It is strange, in a quiet way, to watch a person accept limitation. I always find it strange when people imagine genius as a fire that never dims. In real life, even the brightest mind is housed in a body that gets tired. The body is not an enemy. It is just a truth. The garden remains his refuge. He walks when he can. Some days, the walk is short. A few steps, a pause, a hand on a wall, a smile at the scent of crushed herbs. Other days, he makes it farther, to a bench, to a place where he can see the soft curve of the land and the pale ribbon of water in the distance. He watches clouds, he watches birds, and sometimes he watches nothing at all, just sits with his hands folded, feeling the weight of his own breathing. The nights become longer in his mind, not because the sun sets earlier, but because sleep is less reliable. Pain comes in small waves. A shoulder aches, a hip aches, the throat feels dry. The mind wakes at odd hours, then drifts, then wakes again. When he cannot sleep, he listens. The house has a nocturnal language, the settling of beams, the faint scratch of something small behind a wall, wind rubbing against shutters, rain, when it comes, tapping gently, then slowing, then stopping, as if the clouds are also tired. In those awake hours, his thoughts return to unfinished things. He remembers Florence with its elegance and its cruelty, a city that could worship beauty and punish difference in the same breath. He remembers the anonymous accusation, the months of uncertainty, the way his own name felt like something that could be taken from him. He remembers Milan at its height, the court glittering, the halls filled with voices, the smell of wax and perfume and iron. He remembers the Duke's smiling promises, and the way those promises were always balanced against necessity. He remembers the day the horse was destroyed, and how he tried to keep his face calm, because anger would not rebuild clay. He remembers Venice, pragmatic and damp, its canals breathing salt. He remembers Rome, brilliant and crowded, filled with young artists, moving quickly, as if time belonged to them alone. And then he remembers the road, again and again, dust underfoot, a cloak pulled tighter against wind, a notebook wrapped carefully to protect it from rain, the constant need to adapt. It is easy to romanticize travel, but travel for him was often exile. Here, finally, he is not exiled. He is simply old. Melzi becomes the center of practical life. He arranges visitors. He handles letters. He makes sure the old man eats, even when appetite fades. He keeps track of the papers, the drawings, the little machines. He watches for moments when Leonardo looks lost in thought and does not disturb him. And when Leonardo wants to speak, Melzi is there, ready. There is a kind of love in that readiness. Not a love that needs to be declared, a love that appears in small actions. A cup of water placed within reach, a blanket drawn up, a door closed quietly to keep out cold air. Sometimes Francis visits. The king's presence brings a gentle shift in the room. The servants straighten. The air becomes slightly more formal. But Francis himself, in these later visits, is less kingly and more human. He sits close. He speaks softly. He does not ask for grand designs now. He asks for stories, for thoughts. Leonardo tells him about light. He describes how it can lie, how the eye can be fooled, how a shadow can make something seem softer than it is. He describes how a smile can be ambiguous because the muscles around it are tiny, because perception depends on what the viewer expects. He explains it with the calm voice of someone who has spent his life watching the world with patience. Francis listens, as if he is trying to memorize the sound. There is a moment in one of these conversations when Leonardo pauses and looks at the king with a faint sadness that is also tenderness. He says, in essence, that the world is full of questions that will outlive them both. And the king, young and powerful, nods as if he understands. And maybe he does, a little. As spring turns towards summer, Leonardo prepares. He asks for confession. He arranges his will. He gives his notebooks and drawings to Melzi with the seriousness of a man handing over a living thing. He leaves money to servants. He makes small gestures of gratitude, as if he wants the house itself to feel honored. He does not speak about fear. If there is fear, it is hidden deep, behind the practiced calm of a man who has watched too much of life to be surprised by its ending. He speaks about order. He wants things placed correctly, papers tied, tools put away, loose threads gathered. You know that feeling when you are about to leave a room and you want it to be neat, not because anyone will judge you, but because you want the room to hold peace after you are gone. Leonardo has that feeling. Then, one morning, his body simply begins to let go. It is May, and the air is softer now. The garden smells green. The light comes in at an angle that makes dust visible, floating, slow, like tiny planets in a private universe. He is in bed. The sheets are cool against his legs. A blanket rests over him with gentle weight. His breathing is shallower. Each inhale is a careful act. People move quietly in the room. A servant brings water. Someone adjusts a pillow. The priest murmurs words that have been said by countless mouths, words meant to make death less lonely. Melzi stays close. Leonardo's eyes open, then close, then open again. The gaze is not frightened. It is distant, as if he is looking at something that is not in the room. There is a legend that Francis held him as he died. It is a beautiful image, and it may not be literally true. As we understand it, the king was likely nearby, perhaps even present, but the exact details are uncertain. The record stays quiet, and yet the story persists because it feels emotionally true. The idea that power might finally bow its head to genius, not to use it, but to honor it, whether in arms or simply in presence. There is companionship. Leonardo's lips move once. Maybe he is speaking to God. Maybe he is speaking to the world. Maybe he is simply shaping a breath into sound, out of habit, and then the breath slows. The room holds still. You can imagine, if you let yourself drift into it, the sound of the fire in another room, the steady crackle that continues even when a life stops. You can imagine the candle, the tiny flame that bends when someone shifts, then steadies again. Leonardo is gone. Outside, the valley does not change dramatically. Birds still call, water still moves, leaves still tremble in a breeze. The world continues, indifferent in its beauty. Inside, a different kind of silence begins. The notebooks remain, pages filled with mirror writing, with vortices and bones and gears, with questions pressed into ink. Paintings remain too, some finished, some carried, like companions for years. The famous smile, the soft shadows, the faces that seem to contain more than paint. It is tempting to say that he was the last universal genius. That may be true, or it may be a romantic exaggeration, but it is certain that his mind moved across disciplines in a way that was rare even then. He looked at the world as a connected thing, water like hair, veins like branches, light like a substance, the human body like a landscape, and even his unfinished work had power. The great horse that never became bronze still taught artists how to see a horse. The mural that failed still taught painters how to capture movement and fury. The notebooks that were hidden for centuries would later astonish people who believed they were the first to ask certain questions. This is the quiet miracle. A life does not need to be tidy to be meaningful. A mind does not need to finish everything to change everything. Afterward, the house continues its small routines, but each routine feels changed. A basin is carried away with water that has cooled. Linen is folded with extra care. Someone opens a window, and the room fills with fresh air and the scent of damp grass. Curtains move slightly, then settle. Dust drifts in the light again. Unbothered, Melzi sits beside the bed for a long time. He does not rush to stand. You know that feeling when you reach for something that has always been there, and your hand closes on air. It is quiet, but it is sharp. Eventually, life asks for practical things. Papers are brought, seals are pressed, servants wait, eyes lowered, listening for their names, for reassurance that they will not be abandoned. And in the workshop, the notebooks wait too, bound with cords, stacked like sleeping animals. There is a funeral, simple, compared to the grand ceremonies of kings. The church is cool inside. Stone holds the night chill. Candles burn with small, steady flames. Smoke rises thin and slow, smelling of wax and old walls. Voices murmur prayers, in a tone that is almost like a lullaby. Footsteps echo, then the echo fades. Outside, the valley continues. A cart passes on the road. Hooves make a soft rhythm in the mud. A gardener pulls weeds and smells the crushed green scent rise. Life moves forward, the way it always does. And still, the pages remain. If you have ever kept an old letter, you know how paper can feel alive. It is only fibers and ink, and yet it carries a voice. Leonardo's pages carry many voices, layered together. The boy watching birds, the man tracing arteries, the engineer imagining water tamed into channels. For a long time, those pages will travel, copied, sold, hidden. Some will vanish. Some will survive almost by accident. The rock record is not the only record with gaps. History itself forgets and then remembers, unevenly, but enough remains. Enough to let us sit here, now, by our own imagined fire, and feel that faint thread connecting a modern listener to a Renaissance room. This is not the hour for ambition. This is the hour for stillness. So let the story end the way it began, with a candle and a soft breath. Let the dark parts be honest, but distant, like thunder far beyond the hills. Betrayal, war, accusation, exile, they were real. They shaped him, and in the end, what surrounds him is quieter. A friend writing down a final thought, a king sitting close, listening, a valley holding its mist, a room holding its warmth. As your breathing slows, imagine those notebooks closing gently, not with a snap, but with a soft hush of paper. Imagine the fire settling into coals. Imagine the last candle lowering its flame, not in panic, just in completion. And in that completion, there is rest. One more slow breath. Feel the weight of the day releasing from your forehead, from the back of your neck, from the small muscles that tighten without permission. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Let the eyes soften behind closed lids. Outside the story, your room is safe. Inside the story, the valley is quiet. And time, that great patient river, keeps moving without needing you to chase it. If a thought tries to rise, let it rise. Then let it pass, like a leaf on water, like smoke above the hearth. No need to follow it, no need to solve it. Let the last images dim, like lanterns being covered one by one. Let the edges of the world soften. Let the silence do what it has always done, patiently, gently. As the night returns to your own room, as the fire beside us settles into a slower burn, you can let Leonardo's story become what it really is at this hour. Not a lesson you must remember, not a list of achievements, just a long, gentle reminder that time moves, that light fades, that curiosity can be a soft companion, and that even in a world filled with betrayal and war, there can be small rooms where a candle holds steady. Let your jaw loosen, let your shoulders fall, let your breath slow. And when your thoughts wander, let them wander through gardens, through paper, through quiet rivers, through the dim gold of candlelight on old pages. Nothing is required of you now, only rest. Good night.